Hey, Gaston.
Good morning. How are you doing?
Doing okay. Okay, there we go. We're now recording. Um, so I was going to meet with a couple folks that I've been chatting with about just brainstorming some ideas for the API working group backlog. I think that's also something we can do in this meeting is come up with items for the backlog. So I'm going to show a few slides about metrics. We can chat a bit about metrics today, and then with whatever time we have left, we could do a little brainstorming session, see if we can come up with a few items for a formalized backlog for the working group. And then going forward, that's something that we can check in on and continue to solicit items for the API backlog. So let me share my screen real quick. I put together a few slides, nothing crazy, but I just wanted to get the conversation started. And the main thing I would love to get out of this meeting is some feedback and thoughts from the other folks here about what y'all are looking for in metrics from Mesos, and what things we might add to the project in terms of metrics to make them more useful and more usable for the users out there. So I'll go ahead and just go through these slides. Can you all see that okay?
Yep.
Okay, great. And then feel free to, of course, interrupt me as we go. And when we're done with the slides, we can just discuss as long as we like about the current and future metrics in Mesos. So I just wanted to review the current interface real quickly. I apologize if this is all just known information for all you guys, but this will just make sure we're on the same page to start. So the master and the agent expose metrics via the operator API. We have these older unversioned endpoints, the metric snapshot endpoint. So that's really not part of any API, so to speak, but that route is added by default by the metrics actor that we have in libprocess. And then in the V1 API, we have an actual versioned call for getting metrics, the get metrics call. And it uses the same underlying function on the metrics actor to get the metrics and then exposes them pretty simply via a list of key value pairs. And all metrics just return a double value. So there's no metadata. There's just the metric name, the key, and a double. We have a few different metric types currently. We have gauges, counters, and then we have timers, which can offer statistics calculated from the time series that's stored in the timer. So this is a little snippet from the master's metrics output.
Greg,
yeah, what's up?
if you're presenting, we can only see the tab that has the edit view of the slides. Maybe it's full screen and you're not sharing the right screen.
Okay.
So we only see the first slide and then the thumbnails.
Thank you for letting me know. I'll see if I can correct that. Okay. Maybe I'm not sure how to. Oh, it looks like I've closed it now. Okay, 1 second, sorry. Huh. Okay, so maybe I'm not sure how to share my screen when I'm doing the full screen, but I can just share it in the browser. That should be enough. Okay, can you guys see that all right?
Yes, we can.
Okay, sorry about that.
Oh, no, no worries.
All right.
Like that.
Yeah, so here is a snippet from the master's metrics output. So we have some metrics here that have been added by the allocator actor. Our current convention is to begin the metric key with the actor the metric is coming from. So here we have allocator slash. And each metric key has a double associated with it. And the type of the metric isn't encoded in the output. An operator needs to simply look at our metrics documentation in order to figure out what type of metric they're looking at. So for example, we have the event queue dispatches. This is a counter. Then we have allocation run latency. We have the current value of the timer, and then some statistics calculated from that time series. The count of values, the max and min value, and then we have a variety of hard-coded percentiles that we provide. I've shown just the P50 and P90 here, and the others would follow. And then we also have gauges. Here's, for example, the current offer filters for a particular role. This could change over time, up or down.
Those, just an aside, those statistics are based on a window. So you don't get to see it here, but it's probably like an hour or a minute. I don't know if you happen to know what those ones are for allocation run latency, but we are computing them on a window of time.
Yeah, thank you, Ben. I do not know what the window is here. That's a good point. So our under the hood, our current implementation is pretty simple. We have a global metrics actor that libprocess adds during initialization. And then application code can add metrics to this global instance. So you create a metric in whatever actor you want to offer the metrics, and then add it using this call here. And then we have a snapshot function that allows application code to grab a current snapshot of those metrics, and it's returned as a map of strings to doubles. So that's the current state of metrics in the project. We have a couple known issues. One is that we have dynamic metric keys. So on the master, for example, we have metrics that occur per framework, per role, and per principal. So when a framework registers, when it subscribes, we will add particular metrics for that framework, some based on the framework ID, and some based on the principal that the framework has subscribed with. We also have per role metrics. So when frameworks subscribe in a role, we'll expose things like we saw on the previous slide, things like the number of active offer filters for a particular role. So this is not ideal. It means that the set of metric keys or metric names offered by the master will change over time. It's not fixed, which can make writing tooling to consume those metrics a little more difficult. We also have the issue that our data model isn't extensible currently. We just expose a primitive type, just a double. So we don't have any way to add additional information we may want to add going forward. So for example, the per framework metrics, rather than adding new keys, we could do something like tag a fixed metric key with the framework ID and the framework name. This is more along the lines of what I've seen in other projects. So just a few of my thoughts on possible future directions for metrics. I'll share my thoughts, and then I'm really interested in hearing what you guys think and what you guys need. So I think we could expose our metrics in a more standard format, something that's used outside of just the Mesos project.
Well, let's be clear. The old school formats for a lot of metric systems were flat key value pairs. That's kind of why we did that.
Mm-hmm.
I would say that these are more like modern metric system formats, just to be a little pedantic about it. Like
Yeah,
we didn't choose some arbitrary thing for just Mesos. So originally we chose it because it happened to be at the time what everything else used at Twitter. And I believe that was inspired by what everything was using at Google, which was just like a flat key value structure.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there might be systems that still use that. But yes, some of these modern systems don't.
Yeah, I think that's fair. The current format does make sense and it works. We just have a couple issues we've identified with it.
Yeah, to just pile on to Ben's point, I would argue that there is no standard metrics format. SNMP maybe, but obviously no one wants to write SNMP integration for all their projects, and that's probably why everyone ended up doing flat JSON maps as the simplest possible thing.
Just to chime in here, I think although there is no standard, I think with the with the place the Mesos embedded into the extended cloud-related ecosystems, Prometheus is definitely quite popular in the project that is closely related to Mesos. So this is, I feel like, although this is not standard, this is one of the things that people interact with Mesos will often got exposed to previously.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think practically everyone who's running Mesos will be collecting stats either using Prometheus or Graphite. So probably if you like supporting those two systems is probably, I don't know, more than 90% of users by far.
I guess that may be true, but we still do have users using systems that don't have tags that are flat things. So if we were to list out requirements here, hopefully we would list out that there's some way for those users to continue consuming metrics, even though we might change the data model.
Yeah, I mean, one way is, you can usually take a tags-based thing, something with tags, and turn it into like a flat data model.
Yeah, I don't know if we have requirements here, but that's something we probably want to capture before we can make any kind of decisions, right?
Yeah, that makes sense.
What was your last point, James? I didn't quite follow
that. Well, right now, I guess Mesos Exporter, for example, takes the flat key space and turns it into tags. So one way to support, so any system that needs to export a flat namespace can do the inverse. So you take the tags and you combine them to make a flat namespace entries.
Mm-hmm.
But as I agree with Ben, we need to understand who would need that and whether a proposal would be workable.
Mm-hmm. Hey, Gaston, could I ask a favor of you?
Sure.
Could you take notes in the agenda doc as the discussion is ongoing?
Can, yeah, sure.
Thank you. I appreciate that. So yeah, I guess in the discussions I've had with people and the reading that I've done, it seems like, as you suggested, James, a lot of folks are using Prometheus. That seems like a format that a lot of people are comfortable with. And I think there are a couple different angles to it. I touched on this in the following slide, I guess. One is the actual data model, and the other is the format itself. Because I think we could imagine exposing a JSON or protobuf representation of a metric that adheres somewhat to the Prometheus data model, but may not actually be in the textual Prometheus format. And then a JSON or protobuf representation like that would be easily translated into an actual line-based Prometheus record, if that's what the user desires. So that's one question in my mind is, like, let's say, so the Prometheus data model includes a metric name, it includes arbitrary list of key value pairs, the labels or tags, 64-bit floating point value, a timestamp, and then you can also use some special notation on additional lines which precede a given metric to include a help string, like a doc string, and to explicitly specify the metric type.
Now, wasn't there different structure based on type? Like for histograms, and I thought that there was some structure if you looked at what Prometheus wants to consume.
Yeah.
Is that not the case?
I think in the case of histograms, they're included in the key value pairs. The histogram values, I think, are included as key value pairs. I'm not 100%
Oh,
sure.
as labels?
Yeah, I think that's the case.
Okay, so I guess like the types set certain expectations on the data in terms of what gets filled in. Like a histogram is expected to maybe have a bunch of labels corresponding to the percentiles or something.
I think so. I should know that for sure, but the example record that I have here is just a simple counter. We could look up an example for a histogram real quick.
So I have an example here. So besides labels, I think, so under a common prefix, there's also like count and sum, which are not labels, but basically you group them, I guess, by a prefix.
Okay.
Yeah, there's the bucket suffix, there's the count.
Yeah.
That's part of the histogram exposition format. So it's not a label, it's what at least Prometheus calls the exposition format. So the wire format for histogram.
This is the text format, or?
Yeah, so as I understand it, in current Prometheus, the text-based format is the only exposition format.
Yeah, you understand correctly.
Okay. So
I guess the histogram tags are included as labels here, but they have special significance. So I think it's
okay.
As you were suggesting, then, that the type here sets expectations about the content of the labels.
Yeah, see, if you scroll up, there are some requirements there, like they should be increasing numerical order and stuff like that. And they look like labels.
Yeah, I'm just curious because that's one place where I don't think we're so aligned with what other metrics systems are doing with histograms and timing percentiles. We just have like a timer. Right now, you could actually turn on the histogram, or the statistics, I should say, for any metric, which doesn't really make sense in retrospect, but I mostly use that for timers. And it's like embedded in the metric. Whereas I think from what I've seen from other libraries, there's like explicit histogram data structures you can use. I'm wondering what the difference here is between the bucket thing and the seconds RPC stuff below it. Like, is this bucket thing an actual data structure that this library gives you, and you can use it in your code, or is it just like, what's the difference between the RPC duration seconds stuff and the bucket stuff?
Those are different types of metrics. One is a summary and the other is a histogram, basically.
Okay, so they call the other one summary. All right.
And as far as I know, there are some Prometheus libraries for different languages like Golang and Rust, but those are just reference implementations. You can implement whatever you want that exposes metrics in this format.
Yeah, it's just interesting. A lot of the histogram stuff, I guess histograms, there's different kinds. This one looks like a fixed bucket one, where you've probably pre-decided these buckets. But a lot of the libraries I've been looking at are histograms in order to compute percentiles, like the summary. Because the other side of this, the reason I'm talking about this stuff is the other side of this is like, what are the data structures we're going to have in our metrics library to produce these things? What we have right now isn't really sufficient for that.
And it's insufficient because it's too specialized? Is that what you...
Well, the approach we did for computing percentiles is, as far as I know, it's very uncommon. I don't think I've ever seen a library use our approach. And our approach probably isn't good for large volumes of data. It's probably a lot more inaccurate than other approaches. So we probably just need to adopt a different library for computing percentiles. I've found some, but I'm just curious if like Prometheus comes with any kind of built-in stuff or like recommended approaches for computing the quantiles and so on.
So are you pointing out an insufficiency in our statistics interface or in the way that we compute the statistics?
The implementation of it.
Okay.
I was just curious if about the other side of this, which is like, what are the data structures in the metrics library that we need? But maybe we don't need to talk about that right now. We can figure it out based on what the output is. Sorry.
I think if we decide to adopt this format, then we can take a look at how are implementing this. There are some libraries, but yeah, we should do like a survey afterwards.
Yeah, I'm not aware of, or I don't know what libraries exist to automatically compute stuff like that. This for Prometheus, I'm not sure.
I mean, the bucket one you can imagine is pretty trivial, right? But the quantile one, I've seen some pretty interesting libraries out there. Some of them look like we could probably use them. I just wonder if there's any, like if I look at these metrics, I can't tell if there's a window being used or if it's like some kind of like decaying thing, like exponential decay of old data or something. I can't quite tell. So I was just curious if they like enforce that it's a particular approach, or if they don't care at this layer and they let you do whatever you want.
Yeah, I'm not aware of them enforcing a standard like that. Does anyone else know otherwise?
There's a full page describing how, like, best practices for histograms and summaries, and then some links to libraries, client libraries in Go, Java, Python, and Ruby. So maybe we should take a look at that afterwards. Like, I don't think it makes sense to do it during the meeting. I can add the link to the document if you want.
Yeah, that would be great. Thanks,
Okay.
Gaston.
No problem.
Yeah, so I think one question I have is, if we, like, let's say we do decide that we like the Prometheus format or Prometheus data model for metrics. If we were going to, like, when it comes to actually generating a response, you know, let's say we have a new get metrics call, operator hits it. Do you think, like, do operators want to get this precise textual format in return from that endpoint or from that call, or a JSON or protobuf representation that maps easily onto this data model?
I think from an operations standpoint, the more native support it provides, it's certainly easier for operators to adopt. Then they don't have to, like, write another plugin. The client side consumes it and then forward it to Prometheus.
I agree there. I've been updating with help of Philip, the message exporter, to keep it in sync with the per framework metrics, and it's a pretty painful process. So if we could avoid that, it would be great. Right now, there are a ton of regular expressions that are used to try to deduce from the key name, that's the flat string, what metric it refers to, and then to extract all the labels and that stuff. And it's not easy to keep that in sync with what is supported by Mesos. And when our new metrics are added, that has to be updated, and then releases have to be coordinated. And I'm guessing that also deploying both things at the same time is not easy. So if you're doing a deployment of a new Mesos version, you might be missing some metrics until you deploy the new version of the exporter. You would have to do the exporter first and stuff like that. So if Mesos could just export that, it would be, I think, much easier.
Well, I think if we exposed this data model in JSON, you know, if we had well-known fields which mapped onto, you know, the type, the help, the key value pairs included as labels. You know, if we had a protobuf representation that mapped easily onto that, then I'm imagining an operator may not need to update their external tooling at all if the underlying metrics that are offered change. Does that make sense?
I mean, what I'm hearing is, so it feels to me like there should be two things that are decoupled. One is our model, like all the concepts we have internally, like tags or labels or histograms or whatever. And the second is our exporter, which can be customized for different systems.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe there's like some generic JSON one like you're suggesting, which we just put in field names and things. But there might be a Prometheus or Open Metrics, depending on how fast Open Metrics finishes, or if it's any different than Prometheus, there might be one for that, which knows how to write it in this format. And the assumption is that our model is so close to this that we don't have to go and like look at metrics and figure out tags and rewrite the keys and so on, which we're currently doing in these third-party metrics conversion things. But I feel like those two things should be decoupled.
Yeah, I think that makes
and I think it would be good to look at some of the libraries. Like if you look at how the Coda Hail metric stuff is done, I think it's called Drop Wizard metrics now. But if you look at how that's done, it's a similar story there. They decouple like all the exporters. There's a variety of exporters, and they're decoupled from the data structures and so on that you can use.
Yeah, in terms of implementation, I can certainly agree that it should be decoupled, and if for another reason having to export the current format or the legacy format certainly requires you to have one data model and multiple expositions. But if ultimately Prometheus is the thing that a lot of people want, you're going to have to make sure whatever the data model we write is compatible. So like in terms of how you write tests and how you just, implementing the native model, wanting to make sure that things work, you cannot, I guess, logically decouple the two, even though you should make an effort to decouple them in terms of interface and implementation. And if it turns out that the converter is so simple that it just requires no enhancement per each metric, then I guess arguably it is also one, you write it once and you don't have to change it in Mesos as well. So the effort to maintain that is also not a lot. And you see what I'm saying, right? So if it does require like changing the client side for each new metric, then it will be a pain for either the external client or the native representation.
Yeah, I think that's a question here is it's probably the case that we'll come up with a model that has more concepts like tags and so on and labels, but we're then going to have to do things to make sure that the flat key structure that some existing users expect continues to work. Whether we continue to make new metrics work in that model or not, it's another open question. Would we tell those users, okay, here's the new model, we make all the old metrics work, but any new metrics going forward, we're not going to make work? I don't know. But if we do want to make them work, we would have to figure out how to map the tags and so on to some kind of flat structure.
Yeah, I can imagine having like a metrics exporter or metrics converter module interface in Mesos. So we could have our internal representation that we think is generally useful and extensible, and then convert that to different formats. So we could have an exporter that would generate Prometheus, and maybe we could, I think this is what you're alluding to, Ben, have something like an exporter that converts to the existing flat structure.
Yeah.
So we could actually have all metrics served by this new infrastructure, but still present the same format to users who hit metric snapshot or the existing get metrics call.
I mean, I think that's straightforward, right? You just have different endpoints which will serve your different formats, and we've had proof of concept code before. The benefit here we're talking about the internal data model is that if you have a richer internal data model, then you can present a richer Prometheus expedition, Like right now, there's a bunch of things you can't do with the Prometheus. You can't add the extra dimensions into Prometheus from the libprocess metric subsystem, just because you would have to encode knowledge about how to crack the textual components of the metric name.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, either we do that, like we take a flat thing and we figure out what are the tags here and make them tags when we're exporting, or we have this tagged structure and we figure out what would be a good flat name for this based on tags. It seems like it's probably gonna be the latter. What?
Yeah, I was going to say it's much easier to keep the dimensions internally and then flatten them than it is to the other way around.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's my assumption as well. We just probably have to write that thing which knows about every metric and applies some kind of change to them.
And
like
you can
handwritten for each one, right?
I'm not sure you need to handwrite it, but maybe. I think, but you can imagine other different kinds of exposing these metrics. Like you could have for the per framework metrics, for example, you could have RESTful paths where you query /metrics/framework/role/ whatever. So you can sample, you can imagine a set of endpoints where you can sample subsets of the metrics, and that can all be backed by the same internal metrics store, right?
Yeah, and with the
that sounds
addition
interesting.
per framework metrics, that's especially useful now, right?
Yeah, I mean, it'd be nice to see all those kinds of interesting use cases. It sounds very useful. So maybe we could collect those things that we want to have available. Like
Yeah,
it seems like maybe in requirements, like having support for something like that.
I think that having labels as dimension, basically textual names for dimensions, I think that plumbing that through the API is relatively straightforward, adding that support. The histogram one is probably a little bit trickier getting the concepts right.
Well, the label stuff is, I mean, it's easy to add the support. I guess the question is, what do we do to all the existing metric names? We'd have to make all those start using labels. And I feel like that's the harder part. I don't know if you're saying that's also easy, or
I don't.
like we have lots of metrics. We would have to audit all of them and figure out, okay, what should this look like now with labels? No?
The metric snapshot endpoint has to be able to produce the same data, I think.
Right.
You're not going to make this change and then break everyone who's using that today.
Right, but the way I was imagining that would work is that there's this exporter for the old format which has first-class knowledge of how to preserve the backwards compatibility. So it knows which labels to pluck and put together with slashes in order to preserve the old format.
Yeah, I think it would have to know something about the set of dimensions that we have implicitly today.
Yes, yeah. In order to convert back to what it used to be, yeah. I mean, that's how I was imagining we would do this change. It's like if we change the model, we then go and change all the existing metrics. We'd audit them all, figure out what we think makes sense, and then have a converter that knows how to get exactly back to what it used to be like for the flat structure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that'll be okay just to start with. I mean, maybe someday in the future we'll hit issues where, we add dimensions that we can't really represent or something. But
yeah, I guess
immediate conversion, I agree.
Yeah, I guess the question is like, will we continue to try to move forward with the flat, putting new things in the flat namespace or not? Or we tell users that like all the new metrics, we're not going to add them to the flat structure. I don't know. I'm just curious what users would say. I at least know that Twitter's still using the flat stuff, so maybe.
What did Twitter use for metrics? They have a custom thing?
Yeah. All the components internally had like a flat key value structure. Maybe that's changed. Maybe there's like more functionality or some new stuff, and then it doesn't matter, but could probably figure that out by talking to them.
I mean, at least naively to me, it seems pretty straightforward to continue. Like if we add, as we add new metrics, it seems, even if we have arbitrary tags on them, it seems to me fairly straightforward to continue supporting the flat structure. It just may become cumbersome.
Yes. We could also maybe mandate that like when you construct a metric, you have to provide the mapping to flat so that it's impossible to not address it. You know?
So we could special case that as part of the interface rather than having a normal exporter.
Well, the exporter would just not have to have any handwritten conversion code. It would grab the like, when you construct a metric, you're like, okay, here's the name and all the tags. And this is the flat name. It's like this plus this tag value plus this slash plus this tag value, whatever. That would be another way to force that people, every time metrics get added, we don't forget.
Yeah, you push the burden to the caller rather than the endpoint.
Yeah.
And you could do that you could provide that burden as a function or something. So rather than like an actual string, so that you can probably reduce it down to a very small number of like transformation functions.
Yeah, I'm just thinking the ways, like currently, so if we have tags, we'll have, like the metrics interface will change such that we add a fixed key once and then like push new samples into that metric over time. So whereas currently we are always adding new metrics, and when we add a metric, we would maybe provide the flat name as well as the full type. If we move to having tagged metrics in the call site, we're not going to be quote unquote adding a new metric every time. We'll just be pushing values into this fixed metric key. So at that point, like explicitly providing a flat name, it's, I don't know, maybe seems awkward to me. Does that make sense what I'm saying?
I don't know if we're on the same page. I think
Okay.
You may have misinterpreted but what we were saying, but I think this is kind of just, it's interesting discussion. We can probably flesh it out a little bit more as we know what we want to do.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. What I'm
but
taking
we know,
away,
but I guess I mean, I don't know. Maybe I can say my takeaway first. Sorry.
Yeah, please.
It sounds like there's some different ways to preserve backwards compatibility if we do decide to change the data model, and it's okay to change the data model. We can think through how to preserve the backwards compatibility in a way that's easy to maintain.
Yeah, I think the kind of the takeaway action items that I currently had in mind was to first off try to define an internal representation that we think is suitable and will be usable going forward, and to try to define a module interface for like a modular metrics exporter that we could use to convert that internal representation into an operator consumable one. And then I think third, to kind of formally define what the requirements are for our next metrics design. Those were kind of the 3 action item takeaways that I had in mind. What do y'all think?
I have a question. Do we all agree then that Mesos should allow, like, there should be a modular interface or something like that, and that the metrics should be exported by Mesos in the format that the operator wants to consume them? Or export them in a generic rich format, and then it would be easy to write converters and Mesos won't ship with any of them? I see those 2 possibilities. I don't know what the consensus is.
Yeah.
I don't know if we can design that right now, but I think that should be part of the, whoever's going to do a design on this should explore both those options in more detail.
Mm-hmm.
And take a look at how it's being done in other places.
Yeah. So maybe, maybe my second action item is a little premature then. So it could be trying to define some internal, richer data model for metrics and look into whether we should be exporting that in different formats.
Well, it would be nice to get the requirements captured. First and foremost. It wasn't really clear to me from this, like what I mean, I guess you described the problems, but it was a little hard to see where those go wrong, where they become problems.
What, I'm sorry, what do you, like
for example, you know, okay, the keys are dynamic. Where does that go? What then is the problem that's caused for someone, users or us or whoever? There's no tags. Okay. What does that mean for, like, why do we want tags? I guess we could flesh this out a lot more, I think.
The second item, I'm not aware of real issues caused by simply the absence of tags, except that without tags, we don't have a way to have fixed metric keys. And I see that as
maybe
life more difficult for operators writing tooling, because it's easier to write a consumer against a fixed set of, you know, pre-known metric keys.
And use dynamic labels, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So like maybe it's not necessarily like issues, but functionality that we want. Like when James was suggesting that, like, you could easily get all the metrics for a framework ID or something together by asking about that framework ID because it's a label. I mean, maybe there's functionality that we want and so on, but I think we should really flesh that out first.
I think the one, at least for me, that one of the things having being able to explicitly say the dimensions using tags, the big benefit of that is it makes it way easier to write a Prometheus exporter. The Mesos exporter currently does a bunch of shenanigans around, you know, regexing on the line, and it's super ugly. And with the current internal data model, you basically have to do something very similar or give up on exporting those dimensions to Prometheus. So really tags for me is all about having good fidelity for Prometheus.
Yeah, it makes sense.
Yeah. So I think we're about out of time. Yeah, Ben, I think I agree that defining the requirements well is probably the next step. So that's something, I mean, I think, this isn't like really high priority work for me right now, but it's something that I'm interested in and can continue putting some time into going forward. So that's something that I could work on in preparation for another API working group meeting in the future. I could try to put together a more formalized list of requirements. And based on our discussions today, maybe some more detailed thoughts about how we might satisfy those and what the real benefits are actually of making any changes.
Okay. I would be happy to help with that. I've been doing some testing, scale testing, and using the per framework metrics. So I had to update the exporting that stuff. So I have some background. I would be happy to help.
Yeah, that would be great. I'd appreciate that. Does anybody else have any other last minute thoughts or any feedback, any requirements that we haven't really touched on yet regarding metrics and Mesos?
I just have one thought. With the per framework metrics, at least for our site, we're going to have to do something about them where something is pretty undefined, just because for us, the number of metrics, the metric count that's going to generate is going to be untenable. Like we're going to have like 250 odd thousand metrics. So we're going to either carry some kind of local patch or hopefully figure out a more coherent way to kind of get that information from them without having to collect everything all the time.
So yeah, I guess one question I have for you is it the lack of tags that presents an issue, or simply the quantity of metrics? Like if we had tags, would it be any better, or you would still have to filter stuff out?
I think it's the quantity of metrics. So, pulling 60 megabytes of JSON or protobuf every 10 seconds, even if you're doing it really, really efficiently, it's still more work than you want to do for a monitoring system. So we just need to really think about whether metrics is the right way to kind of expose this very granular information. I think I'd probably think about it also differently if the only thing I ran was Aurora or something. If I ran like one framework which worked my whole cluster, then the way per framework metrics is exposed right now is probably ideal for me. But when we have a very large number of frameworks, then it makes it hard to manage just by the volume of metrics.
Are you collecting metrics for each framework individually as well?
You mean in metrics?
Like, do you actually go and talk to those frameworks themselves and collect metrics from each one?
No, we don't have anything that does that.
At least on the agent side, I imagine you do, right? You collect the metrics from the agents themselves?
That's a little bit of a wonky question.
Okay.
We do have a thing that collects per container metrics that I'm not that familiar with, but I was actually asked to turn off we actually filter out the stuff on the agent which collects the per container metrics from the Mesos exporter.
I was just trying to understand if it was the actual overall volume or if it was the fact that it's all coming from one source.
My concern is that it's coming from one source, and that source is the master.
And that what, the master?
And the source is the master.
Oh,
so I mean, if the metrics sampling is proportionally more costly on the agent, then I have less concern, because the agent is like, the agent matters for task launch, but most of the time it's just sitting there, right? Whereas the master is always doing something.
Yeah, regarding performance, we do have some low-hanging fruit to improve metrics generation performance in the master. So that may be helpful to you guys. And it sounds to me like then providing some filtering capability, or in any case, some way to grab metrics and not get all of the per framework metrics is as important for you guys as anything else we've discussed. Is that accurate?
Yeah. I mean, the node exporter has a concept of collectors, where the collector, where you can configure the node exporter to say, I want to collect this class of data and not some other class of data because it's not interesting to me, and I don't want to pay the collection overhead. The thing with the per framework metrics is I think they're going to be really useful. So if you just say don't collect them, then at the point when you need them, you don't have them. So that's why I think it's something that requires probably a little bit of time and thought to make some proposals.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think we added that stuff into metrics, but it's reasonable to think about where else we could expose that information to. Okay, well, we're out of time. I don't want to keep people too long. I really appreciate everybody showing up today. Thanks for the discussion. It was really helpful for me in thinking about metrics and how they'll evolve. And I'll continue some work based on our discussion today and let you guys know, sometime in a month or more, I can come back to the group and present some further findings. And please keep your eyes out for the email regarding the next meeting. I'll try to get something set up for the agenda. Thanks so much for coming, everybody. It's good to see y'all.
Thanks, Greg.
Thanks, Greg.
Bye, guys.
See you.
Bye.
Bye.